The Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, has said he would start peace talks with Ukraine immediately if its troops pull back from 4 regions of the country and Ukraine gives up its bid to be part of NATO. It comes as leaders of the 7 richest nations continue their summit in southern Italy, where discussions on the war in Ukraine have topped the agenda. Leaders there have been discussing a deal to raise $50 billion from frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine with aid. Let's talk to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who joins us there from the G7 in Bari. And James, how significant a moment is this, what we're hearing there from President Putin?
You've got to think of the war in Ukraine as being fought on 3 different fronts. You've got the fighting on the ground, you've got the industrial arms race to produce as much ammunition as possible for both sides, and then you've got the sort of geopolitical, diplomatic air war to try and win international public opinion. And it's that latter battle that we're seeing played out at the moment. At this summit, the West is doing its best to try and counter the narrative that says the West it's divided, that it's losing patience for its support for Ukraine. So that's why they've agreed lots of deals, defence packs, more money that's been raised from, as you mentioned, from frozen Russian assets, the promise of more air defences. And then we've now got President Putin's response, which is to say, well, I'm in favour of peace, just so long as Ukraine pretty much effectively capitulates and hands over huge swathes of the east and abandons its support for trying to join NATO. He's also, I think, trying to win a little bit of support in the global south. There are many countries, emerging economies, who really don't like the war in Ukraine because of the disruption it's causing to the international community, the economy at the moment. And I think President Putin is also trying to preempt a summit, a gathering of world leaders that's going to take place in Switzerland tomorrow, where they're going to be discussing Ukraine's own peace plan. So essentially what we're seeing here is part of the to and fro on both sides, trying to establish what they want to be the dominant narrative in this war.
And James, your assessment, and we talked about this yesterday, but that $50 billion loan, and it is a loan at this stage, and as you touched on there, it will be funded by the interest that is generated on seized Russian assets. That, not without its controversy, but feels like quite a significant moment and could set a precedent for future deals going forward. Just talk to me about the importance of that $50 billion.
Look, Ukraine needs as much money as it possibly can get just to keep its economy afloat, to keep its government afloat, to keep enough of its public services going, to try and repair and reconstruct what's been destroyed on a pretty regular basis by Russian attacks. Anything that can help that, I think Ukraine is very desperate for. But this money is not going to come tomorrow. They're talking about within this calendar year. So there's quite a lot to go before this money is generated. But from a purely in principle position, yes, it is quite a step for the G7 and in future European Union members too, to say, look, yeah, we are willing to use the profits from the seized Russian assets to try and fund a big loan to Ukraine. President Putin today said he considers that to be theft, and he promised that it would not go unpunished. So essentially the argument that he's trying to get out there is he wants to tell the rest of the world, look, don't invest in the West, because if they don't like you, they're going to steal your money. That's the President Putin's argument. The West is saying, look, President Putin is an aggressor. He has invaded Ukraine. The very least he can do is give up his profits to pay for a loan to help Ukraine survive. And that's the argument that's going on at the moment. But it is another step forward, and it is another demonstration by the West to try and say to the world, look, actually, we are united and we are determined to support Ukraine in the long run, because this deal will last for a long time. It'll take a fair amount of time to pay off.
James, good to have your assessment. Thank you. That's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, there joining us from the G7. And as we said, it's the response from President Putin that we're keeping an eye on, saying that he would start peace talks with Ukraine immediately, in his words, if troops pull back from 4 regions of the country and Ukraine. There are a lot of caveats here, if Ukraine gives up its bid to be part of NATO. Well, the NATO chief was asked about those comments a little earlier during a press conference. Take a listen.
It's not for Ukraine to withdraw forces from Ukrainian territory. It's for Russia to withdraw their forces from occupied Ukrainian land. And this proposal is a proposal that actually means that Russia should have the right to occupy even more Ukrainian land, all the 4 provinces that they claim are not Ukrainian. So this just demonstrates that this is not a proposal made in good faith.
Jens Stoltenberg there, the head of NATO. Let's talk to our Russia editor at BBC Monitoring. That's Vitaly Shevchenko, who's with me. Vitaly, good to see you. Your assessment, first of all, about how significant a moment this is. James Landale there was saying, yes, it's movement, but there are a lot of caveats, and they're asking Ukraine to give up a lot.
They are, and these remarks are clearly designed to impress. It's the first time Vladimir Putin is saying anything like it, but they are far-fetched and completely unpalatable to Ukraine, because essentially what Vladimir Putin is demanding is for the Russian presence in occupied parts of Ukraine to be cemented and solidified, and also expanded to parts of Ukraine from which Russian troops have fled, such as Kherson, and parts of Ukraine where they've never been, such as Zaporizhia. And clearly Ukraine doesn't want this, and it has rejected these demands.
You say designed to impress. To impress who?
To impress people in Russia and outside of Russia by portraying the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin personally as a force for peace, somebody who makes these proposals that are perpetually being rejected by Ukraine and its Western allies. And it's not the first time Moscow has made such far-fetched proposals. Shortly before it invaded Ukraine in 2022, Russia demanded that NATO pull out of the whole of Eastern Europe and the Baltics. Clearly, this wasn't something that NATO was prepared to do, so that demand was rejected as well, and this demand is going to be rejected too.
Is there any way that we can look at this as an opening move, a position from which to negotiate, where both sides may creep closer to the table and start discussing a potential end to this war? Or is this just purely political theatre?
At the moment, it's theatrical, but given how badly things have been going for Ukraine, it's not inconceivable to see a situation when Ukraine will be forced to sit down and talk to Vladimir Putin. But then again, Ukrainians will be asking, and they're already asking, can we actually trust Vladimir Putin? Because in the past, he has said, we're not going to annex Crimea, and then they did it. In the past, he said, we're not going to annex any Ukrainian regions apart from Crimea, and they did just that. So there's clearly an issue with trust as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned.
And when we look at what was agreed at the G7, so of course that security pact signed between the US President Joe Biden and the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, a 10-year pact between the US to say we will protect you long into the future. Now this $50 billion deal that is done, that loan to Ukraine based on the interest from seized Russian assets. What will the Kremlin be thinking right now, do you think, when it looks at that coordinated, joined up, some of it is not new, we've heard some of this rhetoric before, but it feels like there is a shift in the kind of unified response from the allies of Ukraine right now, does it?
That's the position that the West is really keen to demonstrate, right, given all the delays and problems in securing funding and military assistance to Ukraine. So the least they can do, and this is the least expensive way of doing it, is to demonstrate unity. Right. Now, when it comes to Russia's response, of course they don't like it. Of course they're saying, we haven't been invited to any of these meetings, we don't care. You are using our assets abroad in the West to secure loans to Ukraine, to use Vladimir Putin's wording. That's just robbery. So what it essentially comes down to is how the West will be able to force Russia to change its position, and that's by sending ammunition, weaponry and money to Ukraine. So at this stage, what we're seeing coming out of all these important meetings in the West and out of the Kremlin today, it's a war of words.
Vitaly, it's really good to get your insight. Thank you. That's Vitaly Shevchenko there, Russia editor at BBC Monitoring. Thank you.